Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. The ball is dropped. The champagne has been sipped. 2025 is here. So let's get it, my good people, as I commence another year of sports talk unlike any other podcast out there, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And one more time, Happy New Year to each and every one of you. Hope you have a happy, healthy, prosperous 2025. Get all of your ducks in a row. Handle all of your affairs. Make sure that those are tied up, I's dotted, T's crossed. And I'm not talking about affairs, if you know what I mean, in the vernacular of just life, not just as far as your partners in life. But with that being said, there is quite a bit to get to here. First podcast of 2025, a big year planned. If you listen to the podcast on Monday, you know I talked about that at the very end. And yes, I am so looking forward to what's going to transpire here. And I'm just glad one more time as I thank you for really being on this journey with me throughout the past almost 7 years, which will be March 1st of this year. Whether you're a day one or if this is your first day, much appreciate you stopping by. Much appreciate your support. And let's get it, people, as we get set for another big year. And how I'm going to start off this first segment, college football, have to get into that. I'll get into the NFL and everything else that's happening in sports. But these last few days have certainly been not only wild, not only inexplicable, sad, to say the least, and also very tragic. Because right now, I should have been rehashing and reviewing all 4 quarterfinal games in the college football playoff. The one game that will be played this afternoon at 4 p.m. between Notre Dame and Georgia, that will take place, which would have been the capper last night after the Rose Bowl. And that unfortunately did not take place. So I have to start off with this bit of news, as everybody knows by now, with the just terrible, tragic, and senseless acts of what took place there near Bourbon Street, where 15 people now, as it's been reported, were killed after a gentleman happened to just drive through the streets and onto the sidewalk to just, sad to put it this way, mow down innocent people who are just willing to go out there and celebrate life and celebrate another year of existence and look forward to a new year that obviously they will not get to live out or experience. And the game was postponed last night, rightfully so. Maybe there's some people that will think they shouldn't play the game until the weekend. I get it, that's going to adjust the schedule. I figured 24 hours was good enough for them to do that, because if they did play the game last night, that really would have been struck a chord, not only in that city, but I think throughout the nation, to have a football game supersede what had taken place there, literally blocks away from the Superdome there in New Orleans. And not to get into the whole specifics of what had taken place, and of course not even to give the person who led this attack any type of publicity. I'm sure if you've watched the news and read what happened, you know who the person is, and just gut-wrenching, just heartbreaking. I mean, what more can I even add to that other than thoughts and prayers to the families and the people that are involved, and the dozens of people who were even injured during this horrific attack. So with Notre Dame and Georgia going to play today, and I talked about it on Monday's podcast, so I'm not going to re-preview the game, although I do think Notre Dame's going to win a low-scoring defensive battle. But with that being said, as I get to discuss these games, one of the themes that I talked about on Monday as far as the storylines for these quarterfinal matchups were the teams that already had that game under their belt, the teams that already won a game and have a little bit of momentum going into this set of games starting on New Year's Eve night with Boise and Penn State, how they were going to have the upper hand against these teams. And as we saw, witnessed, and really got a good feel, the teams that had the byes. So that means Arizona State, that means Boise State, and of course the number one seeded in the country, Oregon, do not make it to the semifinals, do not get past the opening round for them. And the teams that already have had hits, some punishment, and even though those games were a cakewalk, as we talked about there a week or so ago, those are the teams that are going to advance. So you have to wonder whether or not today will the theme continue where Notre Dame, who started this whole playoff by destroying Indiana, will they be the team that moves on to go to a semifinal and have Georgia, a team that got the bye, that had a gauntlet of a schedule in the regular season, and now with them being the last team standing of the byes that could certainly advance and quell the fact that the teams that had byes weren't able to get past this round. Well, that is the almost inexplicable when it comes to college football, as we'll get right into it. And we'll start off with the game there on New Year's Eve night between Boise and Penn State. And I thought that the Penn State defense would show up, as they did. They slowed down Ashton Jeanty to the point where he had 104 yards. And I understand he was gunning for a record there held by Barry Sanders, the most rushing yards throughout the course of a regular season in a bowl game. And in this case, it was going to be a situation where Jeanty here in a situation where they could have moved on to a semifinal as the first team that had the bye. And we know that the committee is going to have to rethink this, because for Boise State and even Arizona State, and I'll of course get to that game, and that was the game of the first three that we certainly want to unpack. But I want to go in order here before I even get to unpack everything. As far as the Jeanty and Boise, they were bottled up. They were just in a phone booth the way Penn State had played defensively against this game. They heard Jeanty, his name, they heard about his records, the runner-up to the Heisman Trophy, and they knew that they were going to throw everything and the kitchen sink at Jeanty. And even with his 104 yards, he did it on 30 carries, had 2 fumbles in the first half, and in fact, in the first quarter plus, because when you look at his resume throughout the course of the year, he only fumbled twice. And here it was, not even a half into the game, he already had fumbled, 1 lost, and made you think that it was going to be a long night for the Broncos, and it certainly was the case, even though they made it close there from down 14-0 early and 17-7 before they got the touchdown to make it 17-14, and then the Nittany Lions, they just ran away with the rest of the game and had 221 rushing yards by their two-headed monster of Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen. And for Penn State, who, as we've seen time after time with the coach James Franklin, and not being able to win that big game. And even though Boise State, I get it, they were a formidable team. They played Oregon close there in the regular year and certainly were worthy of making the playoff. Whether or not they should have gotten a bye, I get it. They won the Mountain West. But one more time, this is where the committee's going to have to probably look at this from 1 to 12 and rank it that way, as far as having a situation where you have conference champions automatically get a bye, and in this case, whether your name is Boise State, and I'll segue that to Arizona in a second, Arizona State that is, this was one that the Broncos were certainly going to be in for it, knowing that Jeanty didn't go off in the game, and that the Broncos were held at bay, and I don't want to hear the coach come out, of Boise State that is, and the one Spencer Danielson, I don't want him coming out in the postgame saying that you watched the film, you watched the game, we put up more yards than Penn State, we did a whole hell of a lot, but you lost the game. And you lost convincingly, 31-14. It wasn't as if it was a shootout, 35-31, where Penn State got a touchdown late and you were back and forth, nip and tuck, to the point where you actually should have, not could have, won the game. Where, as I just detailed, the fumbles by Jeanty, the 3 interceptions by the quarterback, 13 penalties for Boise State throughout the course of the evening, they did not deserve to win this game. And for Danielson to come out and say that, watch the film, and to say that we outgained them in yardage, you just sound like a sore loser. You guys were not in the game from the start. You missed that field goal right out of the gate before Penn State got the back-to-back scores there in the first quarter. And yes, I understand you kept it close, and I get it that Penn State didn't run away from the game until late when they were able to pile on the rushing yards. But for that coach, and I understand he's trying to justify that they belonged in this game and that they are one of the top-ranked teams in the nation. And yes, they did deserve to make it into the playoff. But don't have these delusions of grandeur to think that, oh, well, we played so well, or our team outgained a Penn State team who was ranked in the top 4 this year to the point where we should have won the game or we should have deserved a better fate. Nonsense. Everybody watched the game. People who follow college football or even sports for that matter, you could have been the most casual college football fan but know about football or sports, etc., and you would have seen that Penn State swallowed up your offense, didn't let Jeanty even get an inch throughout the course of the night, fumbled twice, your quarterback was just putrid, and then on top of all that, you were undisciplined with all the penalties. So I don't want to hear from the coach to try to mask what was a bad game by his team to think that, oh, well, we should have deserved better, and we certainly did play well on offense based on the 400 and some odd yards that they gained from the line of scrimmage. I don't want to hear that, and nobody wants to hear that. So you're just trying to pull the wool over our eyes, but you're not going to fool me. So you could try to sell that to somebody else, but that was just a bad job there by the coach there, Danielson. So now Boise State goes off into the sunset, and Penn State moves on, so kudos to them. And then what could you say about the game yesterday, the first one, Peach Bowl there, between Arizona State and Texas? And I'm going to say this. This may piss off a lot of people. It was a classic final 6 minutes and overtime, and it was riveting to say the least. But the game overall is not a classic game. Texas was in command of this game at 24-8 at the 10-minute mark of the fourth quarter. So if people want to say that that was a great game up until that part, and then I don't know what game you're watching. Because Quinn Ewers played well. Texas, again, with their defense, they did a masterful job on Arizona State. Granted that Cam Scatterbo, excuse me, because when you read his name, you think Scatterbo, but it's Scatterboo. He had a game for the ages. Rushing for over 140 yards, catching 8 passes for 99 yards, even threw a touchdown pass, and that was a very risky call, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But for people to think that this was an all-time classic game, it was not. Yes, from the point where Scatterboo threw the touchdown pass at 4th and 2. And think about this. This was an option where he threw almost across his body to where he was able to throw a bomb. This wasn't a screen pass by Scatterboo in the least. And for him to complete that pass, where it was caught at about the 5-yard line, and the receiver, Malik McClain, gets the touchdown to get the 2-point conversion. So 24-8 is now 24-16 with about 6 minutes to go. And then Ewers does throw a pick there. Now, mind you, that was more of a punt, the long pass that was up the seam. So, yes, maybe not a good throw there by Ewers, although it was a great play by the defensive back. But now the Sun Devils get the ball. They march on down the field. They get the equalizer by Scatterboo. And then on top of that, get the 2-point conversion. So now the game is tied. So you went with 10 minutes to go at 24-8, and Texas is cruising to the point where now the game is tied. And now if you're a Longhorn fan, you're thinking to yourself, are we going to get out of this game alive? Now, as it was, they weren't able to get anything going there on that drive with about 2 minutes to go. Now, they did get past midfield, and they did set themselves up for a field goal there by Bert Auburn. And what happens? Misses that wide right. So now you're thinking, oh, geez. Now, Arizona State has all the gas in their tank. They're going to now march on down the field, kick a field goal probably as time expires. And now you're going to have one of the great comebacks of all time. And people are going to deem it a classic, I understand, because of how they had come from behind, down 16 points with 10 minutes to go in the game. But as it was, you had a scenario where the targeting penalty that was not called, and I get it, that is a very debatable offense. And how I looked at it was, there was no intent there by the defensive back of Texas to where he did lead with his helmet, but it wasn't anything that looked of malice or was egregious to where he was looking to really knock this kid out. So I understand why the Arizona State fan could be up in arms and think, wait a minute, that should have been a targeting penalty. We should have gotten the ball there. We should have been able to march on down the field, etc. That wasn't the case. And even with Texas getting the ball back with literally seconds left and another opportunity for them to win the game by kicking a last-minute field goal, and that goes awry where that was no good. So now you get into overtime. So with Arizona State getting the ball first, they score touchdown for 31-24 as the Sun Devils take the lead. And then if you're a student, obviously a player, coach, etc., but a student, a faculty member, and an alum of the Sun Devils, I'm sure 4th and 13 is going to keep you awake throughout the course of January, February, spring practice, until you even get to the first game of the year next year. Because when that ball was completed, where Ewers throws that pass in the seam and wide open, Matthew Golden catches it in the end zone to tie the game there. And again, 4th and 13, that was the game. If it was incomplete, the Arizona State Sun Devils would have moved on to play in the semifinal, and that's going to be the one that's going to stick in your craw. Not the next play, in essence, because Texas now gets the ball, they get the touchdown pass right away, and you figured that all the wind was out of their sails after that 4th and 13 play, to where Texas, and kudos to them, they didn't want to methodically go down, get a couple of first downs, and try to wear out the defense. They said, let's go for the juggler. Let's see if we can take that shot to the end zone. Sure enough, they were able to do so. So great job by Coach Steve Sarkisian in that regard. And then in a last-ditch effort there for Arizona State, for them to try to get that corner fade route. It wasn't in the end zone. It was maybe about the 3-yard line, but it was intercepted there by the defensive back of the Longhorns. And there's your classic finish. It doesn't get any better than that if you're college football. And finally, the sport has a game to wrap their arms around, because as we saw in the opening round, you had no good games. Obviously, the game there on New Year's Eve night was nothing much to watch. I get it was close, 17-14, but still Penn State was in control. And then yesterday, Texas looked like they were going to cruise to victory, and then all of a sudden that turned on a dime. And again, on that 4th and 2 option play, of all plays. And next thing you know, you get into a double overtime scenario where the Longhorns, and not only did they get that go-ahead touchdown at 37-31, but they went for 2. So very gutsy on their part. So the final was 39-31. And therefore, you had a game that's going to be for the ages. Really an ending, like I said before, but obviously it's going to encapsulate the entire game here in this first ever 12-team college football playoff. And then the nightcap, which ended up being that, because obviously without the Sugar Bowl, with the, again, just what happened there in New Orleans there 2 nights ago, you had Oregon against Ohio State, and a lot of people thought that with Ryan Day, the coach of the Buckeyes, getting the piano off his back, getting that first win under his belt, and going up against Oregon. We know about the game October 12th where they lost by a point. And this was an absolute taking this team to the back of the woodshed and just beating them down over the course of, let's say, the first at least 30 minutes. Because although the second half was an afterthought, you just knew that there was no way, even where the Ducks came back at 34-15, you thought to yourself, all right, well, maybe if they get a stop and get another possession, To me, they had to get within 1 score for this to be interesting. So I don't want to hear, despite the fact that people could think that, well, hey, now Oregon is back in the game, 34-15. Come on, they're still down 3 scores and 3 touchdowns, I might add. So, yes, you could think about it from 2 touchdowns and a field goal, but there's still 3 scores behind. Even if there were 2 scores, I want to see Oregon cut it to 1 score, and then maybe I will look at it as a situation where Oregon State is now, or Ohio State. Why am I getting Oregon State? Where Ohio State is on the ropes. But as it was, that first half was all Will Howard and him just throwing the ball all over the lot, getting it to his main guy who had 161 yards and 2 touchdowns in the first half and a 1 Jeremiah Smith. Big play after big play after big play. It was just unbelievable how they scored 6 of their first 7 drives. They had a 34-0 lead, and to me it was 34-0 at the half. I get it that Oregon scored a touchdown there literally on the final play of the first half to make it 34-8. But what can you say about Dan Lanning and the just performance and the effort they might as well still have been back in the hotel or maybe even back in Beaverton for all I know, because that was just a no-show for a number one seed in the country. And here it was again, another team, Arizona State, we could put aside for a second, but a team that had a lot of pressure coming into this game, knowing that they had played Ohio State earlier this year and have to beat them twice, not going to be a simple task by any stretch. But here it was for Lanning, who had a big year last year, as we know, lost twice to Washington, and we know Washington went to the national championship. And then Oregon, now this was their chance. And not that they were a dominant team. Yes, they did beat up on teams this year. We talked about the Boise State game. I understand Ohio State was close. We could talk about the Big Ten championship, although I thought that they were in control of the game, despite the fact that Penn State down 8 and had the ball before Drew Allen threw an interception. But even then, I still didn't think that they were in danger of losing that game. But here it was. Maybe they just shrunk under the pressure because the gaps and the big plays that were made by Ohio State, and I get it that they were fast and loose and playing with house money, but Oregon, they were just invisible in this game. And how do you explain that if you're the coach, Dan Lanning? I mean, you guys got beaten up and down the field in that first half to where, let's face it, Ohio State took the pedal off the metal. Now, that's dangerous. You certainly don't want to do that, but they didn't really have to do anything. Now, they did score a touchdown there to make it 41-21, which is what the final score was at the end. But I tell you, that was as bad of a game that you could play for a number one seed, a top-ranked team, undefeated, who, going into this game, I thought it was going to be a close game. I thought it was going to come down to the wire. I picked Ohio State to win the game, 34-31, but geez, they scored 34 points in the first half. So there isn't any much else I can add to that particular instance when it comes to that game. I wish I could say a lot more. Obviously, Texas, Arizona State, we could break that down until we're blue in the face. But the other two games, there wasn't anything to really watch, especially the Rose Bowl game. And that's what you have. I mean, what could you say? The defense smothered Dylan Gabriel, who wasn't able to muster up any offense. And think about this. Here's the difference between that game in the regular season, October 12th, and the game yesterday. Now, mind you, Ohio State lost by a point, but they were unable to sack Dylan Gabriel in that matchup during the regular season. Yesterday, they sacked him 8 times. So you knew that the defense turned it up. They certainly saw something in film where, hey, maybe they can exploit and take advantage of. But Dylan Gabriel was running for his life, did not have just an inch to even work with yesterday, and it was indicative, especially in that first half, by what Ohio State did offensively and certainly were flying around defensively. And that's all there is to discuss. And now you have a situation where Texas will face off against Ohio State, which is going to be a fantastic game. And then Penn State is going to go up against the winner of Notre Dame and Georgia. Now, you could argue whether or not, let's say if Georgia does win the game later this afternoon into the evening, and your Final Four will be Penn State, Georgia, Texas, and Ohio State. I know that Oregon played from in front all year. But you could actually argue that these are the top 4 teams that could be left standing if Georgia wins. Now, I understand Georgia, they had fallen off the map there, not out of the top 12, but from a standpoint of being in the top 4 throughout the course of the year, yes, they did fall apart there late, and they did have the 2 losses on their ledger. But we know Georgia and their reputation and obviously their pedigree, and it's going to be interesting to see today with Gunnar Stockton, the quarterback, and how he's going to perform. But you can actually argue that those are the top 4 teams because Penn State has been a top 4 team all year. We know Texas has been, Ohio State, and Georgia. Now, I get it that Georgia has been a team that they've been more 5 through 12 over the latter half of the year, especially after they had the loss to Alabama and then later on to Ole Miss. But here it is, a scenario where now Georgia can advance and be the one team that has had a bye to squash what the other 3 teams couldn't do and advance here in this quarterfinal round. So that's what you have with the college football, people. I'll be on top of it today. We'll rehash it on Monday, and then obviously we'll preview the semifinal games there next week as they will take place on the 9th, which will be a week from today, in fact. And pretty much we'll actually preview those games. Let me just pull that up. I think you have the one game on the 9th. You may have the 9th and 10th, or maybe it's the 8th and 9th. I should know that off the top of my head. You would think they're JAYREELZ. But I know you're going to have a game on the 9th. But as far as the both games being played, I don't know if you're going to have a 4 o'clock and then an 8:30 window when it comes to it. So let me just confirm that here as before I move on to the NFL. Yes, it is a 9th and 10th. I had a feeling that was going to be the case. So you'll have Ohio State and Texas play a week from tomorrow. And then you'll have the other semifinal game between Penn State, Notre Dame, and or Georgia, or I should say Notre Dame or Georgia, excuse me, is going to be the other semifinal. So that's what you have there with the college football. As I keep the helmet and shoulder pads on to get into the NFL, and a couple of things from this week that I could discuss here before we get to the schedule and the games and all the implications that lie, and which is going to be a drama-less weekend. You really don't have a lot to chew on. Yes, we'll go through the scenarios and parameters, but we could talk about the Sunday night game until the cows come home between Minnesota and Detroit. We know that's going to be for the 1 seed, but other than that, you're going to be reaching. And it's going to start Saturday with the double dip, which I will unpack in a second. But the two things of note here, the first one being is Saquon Barkley. He's not going to start in the game against the Giants there on Sunday, which he was 101 yards away from eclipsing the all-time single-season rushing record. And I get it that the NFL record isn't similar to the baseball record, whether it's the home run record or reaching a milestone in baseball, such as 3,000 hits or 500 home runs or even 300 wins for that matter. I understand that. But knowing that history is in the making and there is a bigger picture, I totally understand that, because it's not about a record that, heaven forbid, if Barkley went down with an injury, Nick Sirianni, the front office, and we all know that fan base would never forgive why Saquon Barkley is out there in the first place. But I would have treated this similar to a preseason game. If I was the head coach, I'd give it a couple of series. We know Barkley is a 65-yard or 70-yard touchdown waiting to happen. And if that was going to be the case in, let's say, the first series or maybe in the second series to where he rips off a big run where you're thinking, oh, geez, now he's only 20 yards away. Oh, now he's just 18 yards away, where you would say, all right, let's see if we can push it. And let's just say, for instance, he gets bottled up and the Giants stack 12 in the box, which, of course, I'm exaggerating. And then it's a thing where it's like, now we can't risk it. He may be 8 yards away. He may be whatever. And who knows? That's where you'd really be, as a head coach, having to question whether or not I should continue to put my player out there and have the possibility of risking him with a big-time injury and therefore thwarting any Super Bowl aspirations that they may have. And it's a big roll of the dice. I understand that, but I would have tempered it by, let's see how these first couple of series go. If it was a situation where he had 5 carries for 9 yards, then you know what? I'd pull the reins and that's it. Saquon, we gave it a shot. It's all good. But if he has 5 carries and he rushes for 75 yards, then you have to say to yourself, whoa, he's only now, what? In that case, 36 or really 26 yards away from breaking Dickinson's record. So why not give it a shot? So that would be my take. I get it. I'm a fan. I get it. I'm not a coach, but I understand why he's doing it. So it's not as if I'm upset or mad or angry. I'm not even an Eagle fan, as you know, but I certainly 1,000% get why Barkley is not going to be suited up and in the lineup for Sunday's game against the Giants. So to me, no harm, no foul, but I would have dabbled a little bit just to see and temper how these first couple of series would have gone. And if it would have been a home run, then great, we're going to go for it. Or if he would have gotten bottled up, that would have said, that's it. I have to pull the plug here. And Saquon, we got to rest him up for next week. So that's number one. Number two, I haven't talked about this guy much this year. I haven't talked about the team that much. And only because he came out with a statement saying that this could possibly be his last game in an NFL uniform, and that being Aaron Rodgers. Who am I to say it's time for him to hang it up? We've gotten glimpses of Aaron Rodgers this year where he has performed well. He still has that gun of an arm. He still has the accuracy, although he has thrown 10 interceptions this year, 3 in the one game in London against the Vikings. But if this is going to be it, so be it. If I'm the front office of the Jets, and who knows who in what direction they're going to go, they still need to get a GM. In fact, I don't even know if they even hired a GM, because remember, they let Joe Douglas go after they fired the head coach there, Robert Saleh. We know Jeff Ulbrich isn't coming back. And I would think if Woody and company and whomever the general manager is going to be, if they want to bring Jeff Ulbrich back, I'm fine with that. Because remember, their defense was good under Ulbrich when Saleh was the coach. So I don't have a problem with that. And I think Ulbrich would probably even accept that, because to thrust him in as the head coach there, the interim head coach, was almost unfair, because Ulbrich, as you've seen, he's been way over his head. And who knows what they're going to do on Sunday against the Dolphins, who are fighting desperately for a playoff spot. But with the ownership and what they're going to do with Woody Johnson, who knows as far as bringing in a GM, as it is, the head coaching search, the interview process has begun with either Rex Ryan, who, if I was a Jet fan, I wouldn't want back. I'm sorry, been there, done that. We've seen Rex's bluster and bravado, and you know he's going to rear his ugly head again if he were to be the head coach. I don't think he's going to temper that in any way, shape, or form, because he's going to try to relive those 2 years in 09 and 10, the last time the Jets were in the postseason, and we know they had long postseason runs, making it to back-to-back AFC championship games. So if I'm a Jet fan, I don't want to relive that. I don't want to go back to think that what happened 15 and 16 years ago is going to be the visions of a Jet fan dancing in my head to think like, oh yeah, we're going to try to go back to that. No, forget it. And Ron Rivera, I got nothing but respect for the guy. He's been battling cancer. He's had a good coaching career, made it to a Super Bowl as the Carolina Panther head coach for Super Bowl 50. But me, do not want him. Sorry, if you're going to ask me who would I want as a head coach, and I know this may be risky considering the track record of a head coach in Miami and then him trying to sue the league and coming back as a defensive assistant under Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh and then now the defensive coordinator in Minnesota, I would give Brian Flores another shot. And he's a local guy. He's from Brooklyn too. So if I'm Woody Johnson, you want a guy that has a little bit of a badass in him. And yes, I get it. You would think that during the interviewing process, he would have learned his lesson his first go around with the comments regarding Tua and putting him on the bench and having some regret there and how he handled that. I would bring him back. But we all know with this franchise, they may even bring Rodgers back. I wouldn't do that. I would start anew, open up the windows, let all the bad air out, let the good air in. And it's not anything against Rodgers. It's just break it all down. Everyone on the team is expendable. Now, for the right price. I'm just not giving players away, whether you're Garrett Wilson or Sauce Gardner, etc. But I would just break it all down and start anew. That's it. Case closed. And for Rodgers' sake, if he has anything left, maybe he goes to another team that has Super Bowl aspirations, that has talent. And the Jets do have talent, but the offensive line, I know they've had their moments this year. But he has to go to a team that's going to keep him upright because he's not as mobile as he used to, obviously coming off that Achilles. And if this is the end of Rodgers, so be it. He's had a fantastic career. Fit him for the gold jacket right now. He's going in on roller skates, so he's going to have his day. And obviously he's going in as a Green Bay Packer. So that's what I got to say about Rodgers. That's what we have there. And a couple other notes. I know Jaire Alexander's been out with that knee injury that he suffered there back sometime in November, I guess in that game against Jacksonville. And I know he tried to come back against the Bears, but he's going to be out for the remainder of this year, and that's a huge loss for the Packers. So when you have a guy who's a very good corner and being paid like one of the top corners in the sport, to not have him there in your secondary is certainly going to be a huge loss. And the Packers, as I talked about, with their 5 losses being against elite opponents, I don't see them getting deep. They may get past the first round, but I don't see them getting past the divisional round. Can they? I think they can, but I don't trust them 100% because when the competition is stiff, they do not play well. So as you've seen here this year, the 2 losses against Minnesota, the 2 losses against Detroit, and losing to the Eagles there, I get it was all the way back in week 1 on a different continent, but still. And then you had Ezekiel Elliott cut. To me, that is small potatoes. I don't even know why. Jerry Jones, and that just goes to show you, it was mutual, the parting of the ways. I think Ezekiel Elliott was trying to latch onto a team that was going to the playoffs. Listen, I get it that he's still resourceful in the sense that he's very good to be a max protect running back, that maybe you could get something out of him. He'll be rejuvenated if he gets to a team that has some legs or may have some legs in this postseason. But are you going to expect Ezekiel Elliott from 2016, 17, 18? I think not. But Jerry gave him a favor, threw him a bone. So in order for him to see if he could jump on a roster here as they get ready for the postseason, I guess that was a parting Christmas gift for Jerry Jones and a former number one pick and one Ezekiel Elliott. Now, as far as the games this week, they are putrid. I get it. The Sunday night game is great. You can't argue that. That is for the 1 seed. And I think the Lions will win. They've been playing from in front all year, despite the fact that they've had the Vikings nipping at their heels, and to a certain extent, even the Eagles. But they have been steady. They've been spectacular. They've been with the game there Monday night. And that was a very good game Monday night. Very entertaining, back and forth. Brock Purdy, UCL, which was feared again. Remember, he hurt that during the championship game against the Eagles. But obviously, nothing to worry about. He's not going to play in the final game against the Arizona Cardinals. So no big whoop there. That's a game nobody's going to care about. But for the Lions, I think they're going to win the game against the Vikings. And the Vikings have had an enormous year. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, buts, maybes about it. I talked about it on Monday's podcast. So for the Lions, I think they're going to prevail at home in that final game. But you had the 2 games on Saturday, which revolve around the AFC North. Cleveland, Baltimore is the first game, 4:30, and then 8:15 is Cincinnati at Pittsburgh. What this means, if Baltimore wins the game, they have the AFC North. They will host a wild card game in the opening round. If they lose the game, and they're favored by 18.5 points. So the Browns, they've been a dead team walking. Dorian Thompson-Robinson has been an atrocity there. I don't know what's happened with Jameis Winston. I guess they want to see what they have in DTR, but still. And the Ravens, I don't know what they're going to do as far as rest goes. I'm sure they're probably going to start everybody until it's 24-0 at the half, and then they're going to call the dogs off to where the Ravens will probably end up winning 31-3. And if that's going to be the case, then Pittsburgh, they'll have nothing to play for, although it'll be interesting because if the Steelers lose that game and if the Chargers win on Sunday against Vegas, the Chargers will have the 5 seed, which would mean that Pittsburgh will not go to Houston. They will actually go to Baltimore, which I think would be fascinating. And I get it. They just played a couple of weeks ago and the Ravens beat them, but I'm sure that's going to be a game. If it does happen to pass, whether it's Steelers, Ravens again, and you know that's going to be a bloodbath, where the Steelers are going to take some umbrage to that, knowing that they lost that game, they lost the division. In essence, that was the game that they lost it. You could say the Chief game or even the Eagle game before that, but still, and I think that would be a very interesting grudge match if that were to be the game. But if the Steelers win the game, they'll go to Houston and obviously have the 4-5 matchup. And if that's the case, Cincinnati needs to win the game, and they're going to need help because they're going to need Miami to lose against the Jets on Sunday, and they're obviously going to need Denver to lose against Kansas City, who's starting Carson Wentz, so no Patrick Mahomes there in Mile High for the regular season finale. So that is your Saturday scenario. And then Sunday, listen, the garbage games I'm not even going to bring up or discuss. The games of note that I will discuss here. If Atlanta beats Carolina and Tampa loses to New Orleans, which I think is not going to happen, I think Tampa's going to win, and that's a home game for the Buccaneers. Tampa wins, they win the NFC South, and they'll host a home game. If the Buccaneers lose and Atlanta wins, because of the tiebreaker, Atlanta will win the NFC South. And again, if it's a situation where it's 21-3 at the half, Tampa, you know that everybody in Atlanta is going to be just frowning and just wondering what happened to their lost season. They started off 6-3, and I'll be upset if they lose this game, and I'll tell you why in a few moments. Because it's not that I have money on them, but I did have that preseason friendly wager on the Atlanta Falcons to start the year. As for the Buccaneers, I'm safe. I'm good with them. And I'll also talk about that in a second. So that's the 1 o'clock window of games that we're going to pay attention to. And then the only other game of note there, and that's in the 4 o'clock window as I discussed. Chargers, that's if the Steelers lose. The Miami Jet game, as we know, because that also impacts the bottom of the AFC playoff picture. And then, of course, Denver, Kansas City. Those games are all in the 425 window. And that's what you have. The Sunday night game is obvious. 1 o'clock, we talked about Tampa and Atlanta. And then Miami, Cincinnati, Kansas City, and Denver. Or I should say Miami, Cincinnati, Denver, playing Kansas City all ties into that 4 o'clock window. So is there any drama? I expect it to be chalk. I think Miami probably has a better chance of getting into the postseason than Cincinnati does because Cincinnati needs 2 teams to lose. If for whatever reason Carson Wentz, who knows, he may be playing for a job next year for his last gasp attempt to try to see if any other of the 31 teams will take a chance on Wentz. And we all know the failed experiment in Washington, the failed experiment in Indianapolis. But we would think that Denver's going to prevail here. Denver's going to win this game, at least I would think. But I think Miami has a better chance of getting that spot because if Denver does happen to lose and Miami's playing the Jets, unless Aaron Rodgers is going to go out with a big hurrah, Miami could be that 7th seed when it's all said and done. I think Denver's going to win because Kansas City, they're going to rest up everybody. You're not going to see Travis Kelce. Obviously, no Mahomes. Chris Jones, who didn't play in the game last week against Pittsburgh. Why would he suit up here? So I would think that Kansas City is going to just take a knee here, and Denver will win this game. And then as far as Atlanta and Tampa, I think Tampa is going to win the division. I mean, I'd be shocked if New Orleans goes in there and pulls out an upset. If the game was in New Orleans, maybe I would think twice, but So you're not going to get a lot of drama. Watch here come Monday's podcast. I'll say, oh my God, did you see what happened in Atlanta and Tampa and Denver and Cincinnati made it? Miami and Denver both lost. Oh, who knows? Anything can happen. And I tell you this, the NFL needs it because this NFL season, and I'll talk more about it on Monday, has been flat out an abomination. More to come on that Monday. So yes, let me get to these numbers here real quick with my over-unders. Now, I have 2 teams that I'm riding big time for a respectable 3-3 record. Isn't that pathetic, people? Very pathetic, if you ask me. Now, the losses that are already in the bank, and I only have 1 win at the moment, and the 2 teams that are left standing, they could both either win, lose, well, we'll see. Right now, I'm currently 1-3. My 1 win that I have was Tampa. Now, the number that I saw, I believe at the start of the year was 7.5, but I saw on one of the websites, I forgot which one, it was obviously many months ago, was Tampa at 6.5. Obviously, they have 9, they're good, so that's my only win. My 3 losses, the Bears were once 4-2 this year, and they haven't won since. Terrible job by me there. The Browns, I know, JAYREELZ, what the hell are you doing picking the Browns? They won 12 games last year with 4 quarterbacks and with a healthy Deshaun Watson, and we see how much he's regressed. And he obviously done for the year with that Achilles. That's loss number 2. And the 3rd loss, never have I done it in the past. I may have picked them as an over, but never picked this team as an under. Yes, my tried and true beloved Steelers. And of course, they blew that away weeks ago. I picked them as an under 8.5. Now I have Atlanta, 8.5. If they win the game, which I think they will against Carolina, they will go over 8.5. They'll have 9. That's a victory there. And thanks to the Giants last week, because if they would have won that game, I would have been toast. And even though Indianapolis, I believe they're playing with Jacksonville at home, their number is 7.5, and they're currently at 7. So I'm probably going to split those 2 games. Maybe Jacksonville has a miracle in them where I will go out at 3-3. But even if that's the case, it is certainly not anything to write home about. So that is your NFL. Let me get to a couple of things here with the association and hockey to wrap it all up. Nothing's gone on in baseball here. As you know, I talked about Corbin Burns there on Monday, so you want to go back to that podcast to listen to that. But baseball should be quiet here. On Monday, I'll talk more about pitchers and catchers. So yes, we'll start to get that dancing in our heads as we're now about 6 weeks away. But I'll keep push on that. Let me lace up the high tops. The association, NBA, we know LeBron James had a birthday the other day. He hit the big 4-0. And in the process had come out to say that he could play another 5 to 7 years. But he won't. Now, that's almost Brady-esque. Because remember, Tom Brady says, I'm going to play till I'm 45. And that's, I believe, where he played too, 45. So is LeBron going to get to 45? Is he going to be at that high level at 45? Now, I can't guarantee it because the guy has been literally from another planet. Physically, as we know. But I would think LeBron is probably going to want to play, off the top of my head, at least 2, maybe 3 years. He says he wants to end his career as a Laker. Now, I don't know if that's more because he wants to be in the pantheon of Kareem, Kobe, West, Magic. Go on down the list. I mean, the billion Laker greats. Now, I have to say this. He would have to win another championship in order for him to even be part of that discussion. And yes, that may be a big statement to say considering who he is. But when people think of LeBron James, I hate to say it, I would think of him more of a Miami Heat player in 4 years than as a Laker in what, 6 years? Yes, he did win a title in the pandemic year. Yes, he has had success in a Laker uniform. But winning one championship doesn't put you in the pantheon of the Laker greats. Not even Elgin Baylor. And Baylor, as we all know, only had the one title, and he was even hurt that year, the 71-72, which I believe was his last year. And Jerry West only has the one title in that same year. But he is not Jerry West. He is not Magic Johnson. I'm talking about as a Laker. I'm not talking about all-time people. So before everybody gets all crazy and be like, whoa, he's saying that Magic and Jerry and Wilt and are better than LeBron throughout a career. No, I'm talking about Laker tenure. He is not there. I don't even want Jeannie Bus to even think that LeBron deserves a statue outside of the Staples Crypto.com arena. He does not. Sorry. Unless in those final 3 years of his NBA career, if he is in a Laker uniform, he wins 3 straight or wins 2 of the next 3 or whatever it is, then you know what? It's debatable at that point. But right now with the one title, and he hasn't won an MVP, Kobe's won an MVP, Shaq has won an MVP, we know Magic has, we know, I mean, please, he is not in any way, shape, or form a Laker great. At least not right now. But with that being said, LeBron, 7 more years, if there's anybody that's capable of doing it, it's him. So kudos to LeBron, and let's see if he's going to even come close to maybe even playing 5 years, let alone 7, like you mentioned there a couple days ago. Now, you know me with MVPs, people. I understand it's history-wise, it's important in any sport. And I get it that it's an achievement when you're the best player in the sport for a particular year. Now, when it's January 1st and Anthony Edwards is already calling Shai Gilgeous Alexander the MVP of the league, and listen, he was runner-up last year to Nikola Jokic, and a lot of people probably thought that, hey, maybe SGA should have won that, considering Oklahoma City, he is the face of that franchise, what they've done here over the course of the last few years. And how would you like to be Steve Ballmer, knowing that you traded Paul George and a bunch of draft picks for this guy, where now he is an all-NBA first-team player? But I digress. But for SGA, who had a monster game there against the Minnesota Timberwolves in a 113-105 win for OKC, where he scored 40 points and 19 in the third quarter, which turned the game around. Well, he thinks he's the MVP, but it's funny because the aforementioned Jokic, all he's doing this year, he's putting up 31 and a half, almost 13 rebounds, and 9.5 assists per game. Now, the Nuggets, they're in the 7 through 10 range, and if you were to give the MVP of the league right this very second, you'd probably have to give it to SGA. They have the second best record in the sport, the best record out west. They've now shown that last year was not a fluke, considering they were the 1 seed coming out of the West last year. I picked them to go to the finals this year, and you can't argue that. But it's only January. You don't give out MVP awards in January. And I get it. I bring it up because it's fodder for sports talk. When Anthony Edwards is going to say something like that, you have to pay attention. Edwards, as we all know, is a great player in his own right. But an SGA, hey, he's deserving of all the accolades that he receives, without question. But right now, MVP, you could give it to him, but we all know they still have 3 more months left of the season in order for him to really get that award. So I just had to throw that out there. And then, stemming from the fracas there on Sunday between the Heat and Rockets, Amen Thompson gets 2 games. Terry Rozier gets 1 for his involvement during that fracas there toward the end of that game. And Tyler Hero, who was a part of that, as Thompson threw him to the court, was fined $25,000. So that's what you have in the NBA. But even more so, big picture here, not for the season, but just where we're at here as we open up 2025. We know that the Cavaliers have been torrid winners of 8 in a row. Now have a 5-game lead in the conference, and that's a sizable lead. Now, granted that we're not even close to the halfway point of the year. Celtics, here's the thing I worry about them. I think that on-off switch, they had that on-off switch mentality, I think. They got off to that great start, torrid start, neck and neck with the Cavaliers. And I think ever since they lost that game in Cleveland about 3 weeks ago or so, they've kind of been They haven't had that killer instinct. And I haven't watched every Celtic game, but all you got to do is look back to last weekend where they blew out the Pacers. And this is after they lost to the Sixers there. And give credit to the Sixers. I talked about that on last Thursday's podcast. But that's after they lost to the Sixers at home on Christmas Day. They blew out the Pacers Friday night. And then on Sunday, they lose to the Pacers on a home weekend against Indiana. And then, of course, they just destroyed the Raptors, beating by, 54, 125, 71? Yeah, that was the final. But the inconsistency there, I think they had that on-off switch mentality that, all right, well, this is the night we're going to turn it on, or we're going to take our team lightly. And I think that loss to Indiana probably sparked something in Coach Joe Mazzulla, because for them to eviscerate the Raptors the way they did was an indication of, I'm sure, him being upset closing out the year the way they did by just destroying Toronto. But you have Celtics 2. Now the Knicks have won 9 in a row, and they've been charred in their own right. Not as big as what Cleveland or even as Oklahoma City has done, because OKC has won 12 in a row in the process. But you have teams that have been on fire, and the Knicks have now won 9 in a row. They're a half game behind the Celtics in the standings there, and 5.5 behind the Cavaliers for the top spot. So keep an eye on the Knicks here as they continue to roll at the start of this new year. And that's what you got there, the rest of the East. As far as in the West, we talked about Oklahoma City, as you know. Memphis, half game ahead of the Rockets. Similar distance, it's interesting. Memphis 5 games behind Oklahoma City, and the Rockets 5.5 back, similar to the Celtics and Knicks, with that same margin of deficit behind the Cavaliers. Nuggets, I mentioned them. I thought they were in the 7-10 range. Now, mind you, they are only separated by 2 games. They actually have gone on a little bit of a streak here, so where they're now 4th in the conference, ahead of Dallas, the Clippers. Lakers are now in the 7th spot, a half game behind the Clippers there. T-Wolves, Spurs, Warriors, and then Suns, who have hit the skids, as I talked about there on Monday. And now the Kings have played well behind Doug Christie. Remember I talked about Mike Brown getting fired. They lost 6 in a row, and now they won 2 games straight. So who knows what happened there? Did they tune out Mike Brown, the players that is? I don't know, but that is your NBA on a whole. And as far as the schedule over the course of these next few days, and you have some interesting matchups here starting tonight, where you have Boston playing in Minnesota, a TNT game. So we'll get to see the matchups there with Anthony Edwards going up against the Celtics. You also have Philly at Golden State. That's the doubleheader there on TNT. I know the Sixers trying to find their way here after just a terrible start. And, of course, Golden State trying to keep their, I don't want to say hopes, but they got off to a great start in their own right, 11-4. And now they've just been below average since. Tomorrow, Boston and Houston. So you got Ime Udoka going up against his former team. And the Rockets playing well. Knicks and OKC tomorrow. That's going to be a very good game. Cleveland at Dallas. So you got some games here to chew on. San Antonio, Wembanyama going to the Rocky Mountains to face off against the Nuggets. And then you have Lakers hosting Atlanta for what that's worth. Saturday, Phoenix and Indiana. Knicks in Chicago, for what that's worth. Denver at San Antonio. So there's your home and home there with San Antonio and Denver. Friday and Saturday in a home and home. Memphis at Golden State. Sunday, Boston and Oklahoma City. So you have some very good games here to sink your teeth into over the weekend. Lakers and Houston. So that is your NBA for the next few days. And then to wrap up with the NHL as I lace up my skates, the Winter Classic was anything but. I talked about this on Monday. Did the NHL even promote this game in any way? Not that I'm watching TNT on a loop, but for the game to not really be publicized or not really be shown on regular networks and say, hey, Winter Classic, not just New Year's Day, but New Year's Eve. Set it up as you prepare for the baller drop, as you prepare for 2024, a first-time Winter Classic, not on New Year's Day, but on New Year's Eve. And of course, the reason being, if that went up against the ball games, it would have gotten just swallowed up and spit out. And as it was, the game was pretty much a bore. St. Louis gets an opening goal in the first minute and change. They jump out to a 2-0 lead. All right, the Blackhawks cut it to within 1, but then they had a 4-1 lead. You had the 2 goals there by Cam Fowler in his 1,000th game. in an NHL uniform, all but 9 in Anaheim, because throughout the first 992 games were as a member of the Ducks, and now here it was in his 9th game as a member of the Blackhawks, or excuse me, as a member of the Blues against the Blackhawks, scores 2 goals, and they win going away 6-2. So nothing you could do about it, and the game was at 5 o'clock. It wasn't a night game. I thought it should have been earlier in the afternoon, but I get it because they probably didn't want to have it early on. They wanted to have it bleed into prime time, have it middle of the day. To me, it would have been better if you had it earlier where people are still home, maybe not milling about, trying to get last minute to-do items on their New Year's Eve list if they're hosting parties or having people come over or right before dinner or anything like that. So I thought they could have done better with that. But that's what you have there with the Winter Classic. The Rangers are continuing that free fall, losing to the Panthers, and in the process, Igor Shesterkin on IR for the next 3 games with an upper body injury as he was collided by his own player, Ryan Lindgren, pushing Sam Bennett into Shesterkin where he suffered this injury. So you're not going to see him tonight, tomorrow, and Sunday. So, and that's at the earliest. Who knows when he's going to come back. And here's a guy who just signed the richest contract for a goaltender in National Hockey League history. So a Ranger team that got up to a tremendous start where they 9-2-1. And since then, they have just bottomed out to, I won't even dare to even say this, as one of the worst teams in the league, but they certainly have played terribly since that 9-2-1 start to the tune of 17-1. I think they were 9-2-0, not 9-2-1. So they have lost 17 of the last 25 games. The Rangers, a team that has made it to back-to-back conference finals in the last 2 years. And here they are. I mean, I don't even know what else to say. The team has just been putrid. They've been just an abomination, and they've made trades left and right. Jacob Trouba and Capo Caco, and they've healthy scratched Chris Kreider. I mean, they're trying whatever it is there at Madison Square Garden, and I don't even know what's going to happen there with the head coach, Peter Laviolette. Have they already tuned him out? And he's a guy that's had a million jobs, as we all know. Did win a Stanley Cup in Carolina back in 2006. Was the Islander coach back in 2002. Flyer coach, Capitals, this team, that team, every team throughout the nation. And here they are now. You would think at some point, Chris Drury, the GM, and the powers that be at Madison Square Garden, I get it. He probably signed a 3-year contract. And even then, I questioned it when they signed him. Go back and check those receipts. But I would think his job is in jeopardy here, because how could you get off to that big of a start with the expectations and with everything over the last 2 years, and then now just have gone belly up? I mean, that's what the Rangers have done. I mean, what more can I even add or say? So that's what you have there with the news off the ice. And what's happening on the ice, pretty much the same here. Teams, Devils have lost 3 in a row if you want to look at that there. Devils have hit a slide that they haven't seen pretty much throughout the course of this year. Capitals with Ovechkin has not scored since he got the goal there over the weekend, as he's at 870. I don't believe he's scored again since then. Let me just double check, because no, he has not. So that's what you have with the Eastern Conference. And then out west, Colorado's played well. They won 5 in a row. Still 7 points behind Winnipeg for the top spot in the division. And I know that let's see, hold on a second. Yeah, they lost to the Jets there the other day, 5-1. The Jets, that is. They lost to the Colorado in the midst of this 5-game winning streak by the Avalanche. But, yeah, nothing more else to add there. Let's look at the schedule as we round it out here. Schedule for the forthcoming days: Carolina at Florida, Rangers, Bruins at the Garden. So let's see if the Rangers are going to snap this 4-game losing streak that they have. The Wild in Washington. Good slate of games here tonight. A home and home for the Maple Leafs and Islanders, as the Islanders lost on New Year's Eve afternoon 3-1. So now Toronto comes to Nassau Coliseum, to UBS out in Elmont. So let's see if the Islanders get a split there. Then you have Philly at Vegas. Tomorrow, Pittsburgh at Florida. Nothing much going on tomorrow's schedule. You got an original 6, Montreal, Chicago, for those interested. Then you have your ABC slate of games will start up. New York at Washington, so Rangers going to the nation's capital, and they're going to play in back-to-back days because on Sunday, they're going to go to Chicago to play the Blackhawks there, also on ABC, ESPN. So you get a double dip of the Rangers, and I'm sure that the diehard hockey fan, they may be into it, but for the Rangers, if they don't snap out of this streak, especially tonight against the Bruins, who knows how those games will fare as we get into the weekend. So New York at Washington Saturday at high noon, followed by Sunday, the Rangers at Blackhawks there at 3 p.m. And then you have Saturday, Boston, Toronto, another original 6. Minnesota, Carolina, Montreal, Colorado, Tampa Bay at LA. That's Saturday. And then Sunday, New York at Boston. No, not the Rangers, Islanders. And Pittsburgh, Carolina, Philly, Toronto, Tampa Bay, Anaheim. That's pretty much it. You got a couple of good games there to look at here. More so in the NBA than the NHL, but that will do it. Nothing else to get into, nothing else to discuss. So I thank you guys and gals once again for carving out precious time out of the early part of 2025 to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the wonderful world of sports. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, review this podcast on wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify. Throw me a few stars, write a review. That will go a long way to increasing the visibility, as you know, of this podcast as I try to reach it to bigger and better heights. New year for an independent content creator like myself, doing this full time, I might add. Again, trying to generate some revenue and income here. So your participation is vital to drive the success of this podcast. I'm going to do it as long as I'm alive and breathing. So, hey, please do your part. Take a screenshot, share it on social media, share it with me, as I will do so with everybody. And if you haven't followed, please go to my YouTube channel at JAYREELZ, content daily and some lifestyle content, which I will look to do toward the end of this weekend into the early part of next week. So stay tuned for that. Also, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just the number. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, or suggestion, the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood. It's in the DNA, as I like to say. Talking sports since birth. Eating, breathing, sleeping, drinking, you name it. And if you couldn't tell over the past hour, or if you've listened in the past, you still got to keep coming back, people, because as long as I'm sitting in front of this camera and in front of this microphone, I will continue to deliver nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. Happy New Year once again. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the foot, baby.